Hi, I'm Megan Finnerty of USA Today. I'm the founder and director of the Storytellers Project. We so appreciate you taking a chance on live storytelling this evening and sharing your time with us. Tonight, we're joining Humana and 5 Americans from across the nation to create community. Since 2016, the Storytellers Project has brought more than 100 shows a year to communities across the country. But we've canceled our in-person shows because, well, it feels unsafe to be together in theaters, breathing on each other, but it does feel important to be together online. So this evening, we have handpicked incredible storytellers who we promise are going to be inspiring, but most of all entertaining, because they're going to discuss what it means to be an American. Why is that our topic? Because most of us are voting right now, right? Like we have early voting or we're getting ready to vote next week. And at USA Today, we and our network, we are passionate about enfranchising and empowering and educating people about the issues they need to know about so they can make a well-informed decision when they vote. Which is a cool way of saying we're not here to tell you who to vote for. We're just here to make you feel excited to be an American where you can vote. And I hope it's not hard. I have already voted. I live in Phoenix, Arizona. We're voting by mail. Is not a big deal. So let's get into it. I'm excited to say hello to all of our storytellers. So I'm going to introduce them and they're going to say hi to you. Evan Turk is an author and illustrator from Riverside, California. Hi, Evan.
Hi.
Hi. He's going to talk about one of his books. Anel Arriola is from Phoenix, where she is the Grants and Community Engagement Manager for the city of Phoenix. Hi, Anel.
Hi.
Cara Romero is of Santa Fe, New Mexico, where she's a fine art photographer, but also so much more, which we'll learn about soon. Hi, Cara.
Hi, everyone.
Mizell Stewart III is he's in Aurora, Ohio. He is one of our own. He's the head of news, talent, and partnerships at the USA Today Network. Thanks for being with us, Mizell.
Thanks, Megan.
And at the end of the show, we're going to hear from our colleague, Annah Aschbrenner. She's USA Today's Elections 2020 editor. So she's a big job, and we're excited to have her here, where she's based in Des Moines.
Hi, guys.
Thanks. Hi. Awesome. So tonight is not a TED Talk. It's not Toastmasters. It's not a how-to. We're literally not going to tell you how to vote. It's not an inspirational speech or an educational talk. If you're a regular fan or if you're new, we hope you know we're not here to sell you anything either. Maybe a subscription. But really, we're here to visit with you. We want you to open your heart. We want you to pay attention to these people because we want you to be curious and care about them because that's how community connection happens. Some of our storytellers are going to be super polished and professional, and others are going to be more casual and conversational. That's important to know because we don't coach them on their personal delivery. We think how they talk is an important way of how they tell their story and of us receiving them fully. So, open your mind to hearing them. We're excited to have all these storytellers. We believe that creating empathy and understanding is vital at all times, particularly though in times of uncertainty. So with that in our hearts, we are excited to welcome up our first teller. Also, we'll say, if you can hear anything, my son George is 1. He's learning how to eat, and this is his dinner time. So you might hear from him throughout the show. With that, I'm excited to welcome up Evan Turk. Hi, Evan, take it away.
Thank you. So I grew up in Littleton, Colorado, and my dad worked for the National Park Service. And so all of my summer vacations were spent with my mom, my dad, and my older brother driving around to different national parks in the West. And it really started a connection with nature for me at a young age. And one of the trips that I remember the most was in 2001. I was about 13 years old, and we got to go visit Haleakala National Park in Maui, the island in Hawaii. And I had never seen anything like that. So we started our drive, which is kind of a notorious drive, up the winding road to Humana, which is about 3 hours long. And you go on these hairpin turns that are going up and up and up, and there's a cliff on one side and a jungle on the other side. And growing up as a gay boy during this time in the closet, I was listening to Vanessa Carlton, 1,000 Miles, as we were going up this hill and staring wistfully out the window and kind of coming to terms with all of these things that I knew that I was going to be dealing with as I got older. And I remember we got out of the car and we started onto this hike. And the hike began in a jungle, which was lush and verdant and unlike anything I had ever seen before. We kept going up, and then we entered under this gigantic banyan tree, which was like a forest in and of itself. We continued on over rivers and waterfalls, and then we got to this bamboo forest, which I had only ever seen in maybe Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. But it was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen in my life. And as I walked alone, I started to listen to the silence. And I just heard my footsteps on the planks. And when a breeze would come through, I would hear the leaves rustle. And then I would hear the stalks of the bamboo atop me, kind of like a giant wind chime in the breeze. And I remember in the peace and the quiet of nature, I was really able to come to terms with who I was as a gay person. And I knew that it was going to be okay. But growing up in the 90s and the early 2000s was a little bit different as a gay teen. The political climate was different. It was 15 years before marriage equality, and politicians weren't coming out to express their support for it. And even the shows that I liked to watch at that time, like Friends or Seinfeld or Ally McBeal, how could my parents not have known? They all made gay people the butt of the joke, or worse, maybe a cautionary tale. And Littleton, Colorado was not too far from Laramie, Wyoming, where in 1998, Matthew Shepard was killed in a homophobic hate crime. And it made national news, and even though I was only 10 at the time, it continued in the public consciousness. And it was something that growing up as a closeted gay teenager was something that I thought this might have something to do with me. So America never really felt like it had my back. It never felt like somewhere I was going to be safe. It was much less something to be proud of. But I always loved the national parks. And I loved the idea that nature was something to be protected and revered and to be enjoyed by everyone. America and I could agree on the national parks. And I felt this even more as I got a little bit older in high school when I was talking with my first boyfriend, Jeremy, and we were having the conversation that most new gay couples have about when did you know you were gay. And he started talking about this trip he took with his family to Humana. And he was talking about the drive, and he was talking about the hike into the jungle and the banyan tree and the bamboo forest and that feeling of peace in nature. And honestly, our stories were so similar that now I can't tell if maybe as a love-struck teenager I merged the two into one. But what I do know is that that feeling stayed with me. The feeling that, there were these little slivers of America and nature that were just as much for people like me as they were for everyone else. And so as I grew older, I moved to New York, and eventually I met my now husband, Chris, at art school. And we kind of drifted farther and farther out of the big city as we stayed there. So first from Manhattan into Queens, and then from Queens up into the Hudson Valley. And as an artist and an illustrator, when I was surrounded by nature again, the first thing that I wanted to do was draw. So every day I would get up and I would draw the sunrise and the hills across the river and the plants and animals that were all around us in this new home. And I did this for an entire year. And once the year was over, I started to think about the parks again. And one day, while walking by the Hudson River, I wrote the poem that would become the picture book, Your Home, an Ode to the National Parks. And that started me on a journey across the United States to 20 different national parks where I was drawing in each one of them. And one of the things that I really love about drawing outside in a place is that you kind of become a part of the scenery. And particularly when you're, sprawled on a rocky cliff face and you're trying to keep your pastels from rolling into the Grand Canyon, you kind of become a little bit conspicuous. And so people would come up and they would tell me their stories. And maybe it was a place that their parents had taken them when they were kids, and now they get to bring their own kids to the same national park. Or the site of a wedding proposal 20 years ago that they go every year on their anniversary, or an aging parent who had always dreamed of seeing the Grand Canyon and now gets to go there with his children. And these places in America connect us across generations and through time and space. And I never felt that more strongly than getting to hear these stories and be a part of them while I was there drawing. But during my research for the book, I learned more and more that these places didn't feel like home to everyone and weren't always welcoming. If you were an indigenous person from whom the lands of these parks were brutally stolen, you might have a less rosy view of what it means to be in a national park and a more complicated relationship. Or for African Americans, natural spaces in America have often been sites of violence, and even some of the earliest national parks were segregated. And so I was seeing that these gifts that I had taken for granted and that I had been given were not the same for everyone. And I think that as an American, you kind of realize that it's your responsibility to make sure that those gifts that you're given are available for everyone, no matter where they're from in the country. And so that became the central message of the book. I really wanted kids from anywhere in the United States and to know that they could feel at home in the national parks and that they would feel that sense of belonging when they were out there in nature looking up and seeing the Milky Way for the first time. One of the wonderful things about this project, even though I went on most of the trips alone, was that I sometimes got to bring my husband with me and introduce him to places or see them with him for the first time. And one of the most special to me was when we got to go back to Haleakala. So we started up that drive, and I think maybe we even listened to Vanessa Carlton again, and we kept going up those winding turns all the way to the same hike that I had done 15 years earlier. And we got out and we walked through the jungle, and the rivers were still rushing, and the banyan tree was still enormous, and we walked into the bamboo forest, and the breeze still came through and tinkled the bamboo like a giant wind chime. And as I sat down and sat to draw with my now husband sitting next to me, I knew that I was home. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your story and your thoughtfulness. Thank you also for like modeling such a sense of like, it's such a blessing to feel like you belong somewhere. And I love that your books focus on like that place for you and introduce that idea to so many others. So thank you for your story. Thank you for your work. Awesome. And if you guys liked Evan's story, you can hit the like buttons or you can clap by, clicking these. If you're watching on Facebook or YouTube, like you can show Evan that you liked him by clicking on some of the buttons, right underneath the story. There's like the like button, reactions, hearts, like our storytellers do look at those things and it makes them feel good. So feel free to hype them up later. Who we like? We super like Humana. On all of our shows, I want to take just a moment to thank our national presenting sponsor. They used to sponsor our stories in the Outside Times, and they have stuck with us virtually because they believe that storytelling is a way people feel healthier and more connected, both physically and emotionally. Storytelling makes our bodies healthier, it makes our whole communities healthier, and Humana believes that these connections are more relevant now than ever to each other and to health. They're really invested in helping us stay connected during the coronavirus pandemic. And if you want to learn more about what they're doing to serve their communities, you can visit them at humana.com. But if you want to learn more about staying emotionally connected to others, you can check out one of their websites. It's called Far From Alone, which we've also talked about on our shows. So we want to say thank you to Humana for keeping us connected to everybody tonight. But thank you also for supporting such like healthy best practices outside of storytelling and other ways of keeping Americans connected.
I got muted there for just a second. Can you still hear me? I think so. Okay, Anel is here to tell us a story that was first brought to us by our colleagues at the Arizona Republic. So a hat tip to them for their curation of this. Anel, take it away.
In the early 1980s, my parents made a big decision, and that was to come to work to the US. When they did that, they left me with my grandmother. And in that house, I lived with my grandpa, my uncles, my aunts, and I was the only kid in the house. So most of the time I spent it running around the house playing. I remember I wanted to be a performer, so I would often sing songs, compose them. I would sing them to my grandmother while she hand washed the clothes, and that's what I did most of the time in there, aside from going to school. And I remember that aside from playing, I used to often wonder, how would it be when I go live with my parents? Because I used to think, okay, I will be going to live with my parents. So how is going to be life in the US? And I remember watching TV and looking at all of the American movies and TV shows. And there were certain things that were repetitive, like the green lawns, the white picket fences. And there was always a kid in the morning in each TV show or movie that he would be throwing the newspapers in front of the house. And I remember thinking in my little kid mind, when I go to live with my parents in the US, that's how life is going to be. We're going to live in a beautiful house with a green front yard and a white picket fence, and every day we're going to have the newspaper there for us. And I created that idea in my head. Another thing that I did when I would be out playing in the patio is that I would look at the sky, and sometimes I would see the airplanes pass by. And I literally believed that my parents were in those planes. So I would often yell out their names. And I believed that if I would yell out loud enough, that they would come down in a parachute or something and be with me. But it didn't happen. And after this, a few years passed by. And when I was 10 years old, they came back home and they were visiting. They brought with them my little sister, who was 4 years old, and my little brother, who was a baby boy. And that year, they baptized them. And we had a big party at the house. So there were all of my cousins, my aunts, my uncles, the family. There was food, a lot of music. And at nighttime, I remember that the phone rang and my mom picked up the phone. And when she answered, I remember seeing her talking. And there was this one moment when she looked at me and I looked at her. And I swear everything went silent. And I got this feeling, and I knew that was it. And the phone call was to tell her that they had received a letter from the US Immigration Office saying that I had an interview scheduled to possibly come into the US. And about a month after that, we traveled as a road trip. We went to El Paso, Texas, to the border crossing there. And I had a health physical exam, and they did some other questions. So I remember that right after that, my parents took me across the border to El Paso. And the first thing that I remember seeing was the roads. The roads looked so clean. All the lanes, they were like painted, something that wasn't always there in Mexico. But I do remember seeing that. I remember that the sidewalks, they looked perfect to me. There were no cracks that I could see. And I don't know, it looked perfect. I was with my parents, so everything was good. And right at this time, I asked my dad, hey, so since now I'm here in the US, when are you taking me to Disneyland? And I asked him because this is something that I had asked every time they visited. And he said, yes, when we go to the US, I am going to take you to Disneyland. So I was very eager. So I said, are we going this time? And he said, yes, we're going. And I thought, okay. So I was eager to see Disneyland. And the place that we were going to is in Northern California. So we were driving there. So it would probably take us like 2 or 3 days on the road to get there. And I remember just looking out through the window as we were driving. We went through El Paso, Texas, after Texas, through New Mexico, through Arizona. And the whole time I was asking, so where's Disneyland? And, and he told me, it's in California. And another thing that I noticed is that I remember seeing this repetitive sign over and over again, and it was the exit sign. And I asked my dad, I said, so what does exit mean? And he told me, oh, that's to exit the freeway. And I told him, oh, okay. And I thought, is that like the return signs that we have in Mexico? And he said, yeah. The only difference is that in Mexico, the return signs are to go back, not really to exit the freeway, but to go back. So I just thought in my mind, and by that time I was already feeling homesick from Mexico. So I remember thinking, so at any point, if we take that little exit, we're going back to Mexico. Like it's like, I remember kind of telling myself, it's not that far. We'll just go out and we can go back. Anyway, so we kept going, and at some point along the way, I fell asleep. And the next time that I woke up, I asked my dad, hey, so when are we stopping by Disneyland? And he said, oh, we already passed it. And I thought, oh, why didn't you wake me up to at least see it? And he said, oh, I don't want to wake you up. Well, we'll see it next time. Next time we drive by, we'll see it next time. And spoiler alert, we never stopped by. Later, I learned that we didn't even drive by it. Anyway, so we ended up getting to where we were going in California. And when we got there, I thought, okay, so where's this beautiful house that I imagined with the green lawn and the white picket fences? But what happened was that we kept staying in the truck where we were driving. We kept sleeping in the back of it. And days passed. We were in a Park's parking lot, and we weren't really going to any house. I remember that I kept asking my mom, so where's the house? And she wouldn't answer. My dad wouldn't answer either. I remember them just talking and having a conversation. And it was in that moment when I looked at my siblings and I looked at my parents, and I realized that now it was my role to be a big sister and to take care of my siblings. And when 3 days ago I was still a kid, now I was definitely the older sister. So since then, every time I look at exit signs, I still think that I can go back to Mexico. Thank you.
Anel, thank you so much for your story. There's so much in it, and you've done like such a beautiful job remembering what is obviously like such a complicated moment in your childhood. Thank you for sharing tonight, Anel. Also, everyone, if you're still hearing George, he's fine. He's just a little baby, but his dad has him. So with that, I want to bring up our next story, Zeller. Mizell Stewart is here to talk to us about growing up in Ohio. Take it away, Mizell.
Thanks, Megan, and hi, everybody. My mom taught me how to read the newspaper, using the newspaper, and I was doing so every day by the time I was 3. My dad was quite proud. He used to tell me that he never missed an opportunity to showcase my skills, particularly when I accompanied him to the neighborhood tavern. Now, Dad would hang out drinking with his buddies, and he'd keep me occupied with newspapers and a pocket full of quarters for the coin-operated bowling machine. Now, the regulars were used to this, but every now and then a newcomer would see me with the newspaper and express disbelief that this kid was actually reading. Now, the result would be a modest wager between my dad and the new arrival. The winner gets a cold beer. My dad would invite the guy to turn to any page in the newspaper, and I would read it. The poor guy would flip to another page and point to another story, and I'd start reading that one too. This was a great father-son bonding experience. I'd get fatherly attention, and Dad would play the proud papa, not to mention getting his beer paid for. I treasure those memories to this day because it cemented my lifelong love affair with the newspaper. Now, growing up, I read 3 different newspapers: the Cleveland Plain Dealer in my hometown, the Anniston Star in Alabama, where I spent summers with my maternal grandmother, and the Vindicator of Youngstown, Ohio, where my paternal grandfather became one of the first Black police officers back in 1945. You might say that journalism got into my blood. I started a class newspaper in the 1st grade and entered my first newsroom just a few years later, when a member of my rival class decided to start a competitor to my 4th grade news. During that period, my dad moved from job to job. He never quite figured out what he wanted to do with his life. Little did I know that the price of that father-son bonding experience at the neighborhood bar was an alcohol addiction that would lead to the end of my parents' marriage when I was 9 years old. Mom told me after the divorce that I would now have to step up as the man of the house. So that's when I got my first real job, delivering newspapers. One year, I won a contest for selling subscriptions, and I was invited to tour the Plain Dealer's newspaper plant at the edge of downtown Cleveland. Once I saw the controlled chaos of the newsroom and felt the rumble of the thundering printing machinery in the press room, I was hooked. While my dad continued to struggle, I focused. I continued to work on class newspapers in grade school and junior high school. And when alcohol addiction claimed my dad's life before his 45th birthday, I doubled down on the idea that I needed to choose a path and stick with it for all that it was worth. So I became co-editor of my high school newspaper and then went to college to study journalism. It was there that I learned that being a journalist was about much more than just telling stories. Journalists had responsibilities to the communities they serve as well. During my senior year in college, I became the #2 editor of our campus newspaper. One week, our newspaper published a cartoon in the entertainment section that contained a racial slur. The incident caused a campus uproar, and the editor-in-chief and I attended a meeting of the Black Student Union to try to deal with the controversy. At the time, I was one of only 3 Black students on the newspaper staff, and no one in the room had any idea that there were any Black students on the staff at all. I didn't know then, and they didn't know me. I quickly realized that I had been so focused on my work in the newsroom that I failed to build relationships and connections with the students I was charged with serving. That experience led to a transformation of my understanding about what it meant to be a local journalist. My focus had to be bigger and broader than just burying the ghost of my father. If I was to reach my true potential, I realized I had to combine becoming an excellent journalist with becoming a servant of the community. Now, ironically, that lesson was reinforced by my grandfather, Mizell Stewart Sr., who had a long career as a police officer and community leader in Youngstown. At around the same time I was learning about the importance of community connection on campus, my grandfather was honored with a testimonial dinner where speaker after speaker highlighted his contributions to the community. One of the speakers that night was the publisher of The Vindicator, who I later learned joined forces with my grandfather to raise funds to establish a youth center for kids in an impoverished Youngstown neighborhood. As I absorbed those stories, I adopted a new focus to combine my love for local journalism with a heart for community. I've worked to put that into practice ever since, in more than 3 decades as a local reporter, a newspaper editor in 3 states, and today, a corporate news executive. Sure, there are some people who would suggest that journalists are enemies of the people, but I know better. I know that my colleagues and I are focused on holding a mirror to our communities. We're dedicated to the people we serve, and we work tirelessly to get it right. When we fall short, we admit error, much like I realized my own obligation to get out of that college newsroom and connect one-on-one with people around campus. Today, amid the racial reckoning that is taking place across our nation, we're doubling down on efforts to reflect America in all of its diversity. And I'm proud to be playing a leadership role in helping to make that happen. I owe all of that to my father and my grandfather, the one who taught me about the need to focus, and the one who taught me about the obligation to serve the community. Thanks so much.
Mizell, thank you so much for your story. I'm so grateful. I'm grateful for your leadership. I'm grateful for you telling your story and truly reflecting on what I know is a really complicated set of ideas of like you were so often the only Black leader in the room or voice that helped try to make things better. And I know that is like incredibly important. I appreciate you reflecting on it, but it also is incredibly exhausting.
Well, thanks, Megan. I really appreciate the opportunity to join you all tonight. Thank
you. Oh, Mizell, I forgot to say, did you tell us your grandpa's name and your dad's name? I'm kidding. That's a joke you got. Ladies and gentlemen, these are name jokes for you. Mizell, thank you so much, though. And I do want to say, like, what a tribute to both men. It's been a really great story.
Thank you.
Thank you. And again, everyone else, if you want to let Mizell know that you really appreciated his story, like you can push the like buttons and the reaction buttons. I know that the internet is a weird place to receive storytelling, and we do hope to be back out into the real world soon. But until then, the like buttons will have to work. With that, I'd like to bring up our next storyteller. Cara Romero is here reflecting on a moment that changed her entire life. Take it away, Cara.
Hi, I'm Cara Romero, and I'm an enrolled citizen of the Chemehuevi Indian tribe. I'm a contemporary fine art photographer, and I make work that's at the intersection of Native identity and pop culture. I was born in Inglewood in the 1970s to interracial parents. My dad's Native American, and my mom is white. They were high school sweethearts at Hawthorne High. After my dad returned from Vietnam, my parents married and had 2 kids. And then in 1979, our whole family, grandparents, aunts and uncles, mom and dad, and the kids relocated our family back to the Chemehuevi Valley Indian Reservation found in Mojave Desert, California. Chemehuevi Valley was a beautiful place to grow up. Just about 30 homes on a one-road town on the California side of Lake Havasu. It was the beautiful California desert, very rural, and the hottest summers on earth. As kids, we enjoyed playing with unlocked doors. We swam all day, saw wildlife every day like coyotes and rattlesnakes. We visited elders with food and gifts. Aunties taught basket weaving and beadwork in the summer times. And I was especially close with my grandmother, who, when I was a child, was chairwoman of our tribe. She told me incredible stories of hardship and resilience about being raised in residential boarding school and ranching in the Nevada desert. I used to pore through the old family photographs. There was one of my great uncle Johnny, who was a welterweight boxing champion of Las Vegas, one of my great grandmother on a horse overlooking Fremont Street in Las Vegas before the casinos ever came in. I was captivated by those photographs. We were just a typical modern Native American family on the reservation. We had big family dinners together every night. We watched Jeopardy. We're about 70 miles from the nearest grocery store, so about once or twice a month, we'd load up and drive into town to go to the movies and get groceries. We celebrated American holidays and tribal holidays too. And like other reservations, there was a lot of trauma. At just 6 years old, my parents were divorced and my life changed pretty drastically. we moved to a place that couldn't be more different or more foreign to the reservation, Houston, Texas. My brother and I started school in a really culturally diverse suburb called Alief. Alief was a majority minority school district that housed dozens of ethnicities in large public schools. We hailed from everywhere. We were Vietnamese, Black, Filipino, Latinx, East Indian, white, Jewish, Taiwanese. I made lifelong friends in Alief, and I acclimated pretty quickly to life off the reservation. I consumed the pop culture of the 80s, roller skating, cassette tapes, and I really loved team sports. All the while, I was always really homesick for my dad and my grandparents and that life that I left on the reservation. So for over a decade, I traveled like 4 or 5 times a year between families, back and forth from Alief, Texas, to the reservation in Chemehuevi Valley, California. I learned to switch culturally between the two, but the reservation was always home, and I always felt a little out of place in the cities. This really, for me, cemented what I call my urban Native identity. One of the things that I learned really early on in the cities is that kids had no concept of modern Native Americans from the reservation. And there was really no accurate reference for us in education or media. When we did show up, it was either poverty-stricken or from like 200 years ago. So when I told kids where I'm from, I'm Chemehuevi or I'm Native American from the reservation, they didn't understand. And it always came with a lot of explaining that no, my tribe doesn't live in teepees and ride horses. Those are Plains Indians. California Indians are totally different. What I didn't know at the time was that our Native American experiences had been purposefully erased from American history. I remember Thanksgiving was particularly horrifying. In elementary school, the teachers would bring out all the colored turkey feathers, and the kids would run around banging on oatmeal canisters as drums. I think I was just exhausted at some point and kind of shut down and didn't tell a lot of people where I was from or defend what it was like to be a modern Native American. Alief and the reservation were kind of hardcore in some ways, and I started using drugs and alcohol at just 15 years old. This went on all the way up and through the university. I was enrolled as a cultural anthropology major at the University of Houston, and things were the same. Everything about Native Americans was taught as bygone, in historical context only, or stereotypical. There was no modern reference. It was as if we didn't exist. I knew already at that really young age that it would be better if we could just tell our own histories and our own stories. And as fate would have it, in my senior year at U of H, I enrolled in my first black and white film class with the highly inspirational fine art photographer, Bill Thomas. I was 20 years old. I had never picked up a real camera in my life, and I had no experience. Bill worked extra hours with me just to learn the basic camera settings, and he really emphasized content over technical ability. And while I was a novice at the medium, I already had a lot to say. I knew this is what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. I wanted to be a contemporary Native American photographer that told visual stories. So I ran off to art school. In 1999, I moved to Santa Fe, New Mexico, and I attended the Institute of American Indian Arts. It was a beautiful experience at a tribal college where I got to attend art school with over 100 Native Americans from reservations all over North America. And then I pushed on with additional studies in digital and commercial photography at Oklahoma State. But I was always so poor in school that I just barely scraped by with enough money to afford photography, equipment, and paper. There were several times I almost quit. The cost of photography was so frustrating. I'm sure it's the number one reason why a lot of kids from communities of color never get to tell their own stories. So when I got out of school, I didn't have a clear path forward for how I was going to become a professional photographer. So I moved back home and I served on tribal council and I worked at the cultural center. And all the while, I never really could shake the drinking and drug use. So here I was, suffering from pretty severe depression and anxiety disorder and poverty mentality. And then at 33, with a complete unraveling, I had a sick child and suffered a traumatic divorce and had a complete nervous breakdown. I had to seek help. So I sought help and I got grief counseling and went to recovery programs for alcohol and drug addiction. And it's never too late. I got a whole new chance at life. Shortly thereafter, I met the love of my life, Diego Romero, whose whole life seemed to match up to mine. He's an incredible socio-political artist, and he had this background like mine. He was born to interracial parents. His dad was Native American, his mom was white. He was raised in Berkeley. But more than anything, he loved me more than I had ever been loved and was so encouraging. So I started practicing art again as a form of self-care. And my work really started to focus on my truthful identity, this urban Native, cross-cultural. I was telling modern stories of Native Americans. And my work became really staged and theatrical and colorful and really breaking away from stereotypical images of Native Americans. I was shy, but I started showing these images publicly. And my ideas became increasingly more ambitious. One day, I had this idea for this incredible image called Water Memory. It has two Native Americans, a man and a woman, free falling in a mysterious deluge of water. I remember telling Diego all about it, about how the content might be from when the Chemehuevis were flooded out of our ancestral valley to make Parker Dam. Or maybe it was about how Native Americans are adversely affected by climate change and the flood that's coming. All I know is I really wanted to make this photograph. And I remember telling Diego that there was no way that I could ever pull off a production like that it was just out of my reach. And I remember he just stopped me and he was like, Cara, you have to invest in yourself. You have to bet it all on art. So Water Memory became the first production that I significantly invested in. I had $3,000 to my name and I spent it all on this production. Scuba diving, underwater camera equipment, models, lighting assistants, and I made that breathtaking photograph that I had dreamt up 4 months earlier. And when I released it at Santa Fe Indian Market in the summer of 2015, it was a sensation. Water Memory proved pivotal for me and launched my career. I made back my investment 1,000 times. There were magazine covers, awards, and it was the first in a succession of photographs that were acquired by major institutions like the LACMA, the Smithsonian, Denver Art Museum. This whole experience instilled in me not only confidence, but this idea that investing in myself is not frivolous. It's actually a radical act of self-care for myself and for my community. And this is why it's so important to support the arts and especially artists from communities of color. Today, I get to travel the world making productions and telling my stories about my photographs and my community. I maintain a studio in Santa Fe, and I'm a full-time artist and mother. My works are held in public and private collections internationally. I have 3 beautiful children, and I still travel home 4 to 5 times a year to the Chemehuevi Valley Indian Reservation, where I inherited my grandmother's home that I grew up in. I'm deeply committed to making work that addresses Native American social issues and changes the way people perceive us in contemporary life. I'm Cara Romero, I'm Chemehuevi, and I'm an American. Thank you.
Cara, thank you so much for your story. I so appreciate all the heart and vulnerability and deep thoughtfulness that went into it.
Thank you.
Well, it has been a pleasure to have you on the show. And oh my gosh, thank you, Cara.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Well, we are closing our show. Sorry about this really bright light, guys. I'm working on it. I ordered in better light for these things, but it's dark in Phoenix. But we're going to close our show with our colleague, Annah Aschbrenner. She is the Politics 2020 editor at USA Today. Hi, Anna. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Heck yeah. So Anna is going to talk to us for just a second about some of the work USA Today and the network are doing to ensure that our audiences are empowered and informed. And the first question I want to ask you, Anna, is tell us about the local to national relationship that plays out right now, because, you know, they say all politics is local, all politics is personal. How does that play out at our company?
Absolutely. So we are really lucky that we have a network of more than 200 newspapers around the country. And a lot of them are in really pivotal swing states in Arizona, in Michigan, Wisconsin, Iowa, Ohio. So we're really lucky that we have people in these communities. They're not visiting these communities. I always like to say they live there, and they're experts. They know the politics of their states, of their communities, backwards and forwards. So we rely on them to give us intel on what things are looking like. And we elevate their work as much as we can. We want to show our national audience that we have experts around the country who they can really trust to give them, the real story of what's going on.
It's so powerful. I know some of these people, have been covering the state houses or the legislature or the players in their community for decades and decades, or at least, a dozen years or more. And they really are able to elevate that perspective when maybe that local candidate becomes a player on the national stage and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So we have some new features for covering 2020 to make our work, I think, more accessible, more comprehensive. And recently, maybe a lot of Americans got to see one of our premier political reporters, Susan Page, when she was debate moderator recently. Can you talk to us about a couple of big things that sort of you've been part of and we've made new for our 2020 coverage?
Yeah, so I think our biggest thing this time around has been our weekly show, States of America, that's hosted by Philip Bailey. Philip was a reporter in Louisville for a long time, very tied into Mitch McConnell and some of the Republican politics. And he has a wonderful show every week where he talks to reporters from around the country, experts, and, just discusses the news of the day. I've been on a few times. Susan Page, as you mentioned, is on. It's really informative and wonderful and really accessible. If you are maybe nervous about dipping your toe into the political sphere, this is a really great, unbiased way to kind of get good information. We also always have a voter guide to try and give people the best information that they can get on where these candidates stand. We're covering them every day. We're on the trail with them fairly often. And we're trying to use every opportunity we have to explain what's going on to people. We have explainer videos. What's the Electoral College? How does polling work? We have the Suffolk poll. So we're asking Americans what their opinions are on things. And really just trying to meet people where they're at. I think one of the things I'm really excited about, we've done a couple videos lately in a variety of different languages to let people know just how to get resources on how to register to vote and where they can vote that we recently pushed out on social media. So I think that's really great too.
Awesome, Anna, that is a huge list. And what I really want to, affirm about your work is it's really not about talking heads. USA Today works really hard not to do horse race journalism and instead really try to focus on voters need to vote on issues that make their communities better, not always on the people. And I think that's an important distinction is it's not inside the beltway type of journalism. It's inside your hometown journalism, which brings me to my last question. There's a lot of misinformation and legit fake news out there. And I think there's a lot of confusing and conflicting narratives. So what is sort of your role and our network's role in fighting bad news or not facts?
Right. Well, I think the biggest thing we've done this time around, we've written literally hundreds of fact checks. We have, a half dozen people who all day are working on fact checks, whether it's something they see on social media, but just trying to let people know that sometimes the meme you're sharing is not quite the whole truth. So we have done—
Isn't that an understatement?
Right. We've done literally hundreds of fact checks in the last few months, which I think is great. But the other thing is really just getting down to what our core values and beliefs are as journalists, which are verifying information, being skeptical, checking with primary sources, and not publishing anything that we don't know to be 100% true. And I think that's been the real focus of the work that we've done this last year is just, making sure that we have all of our T's crossed and our I's dotted so that we, can be unimpeachable.
I really appreciate that. I also want to point out, if any of you guys have watched our live coverage on the USA Today Facebook page, our journalists are live fact checking on the Facebook page. I know CNN is doing that too. Lots of media organizations do that, but that's another way that we are actively fact checking in the moment. And they are so smart and they are so fast. They're such quick thinkers, quick typers.
Yeah, it's great. They're so good.
They are. It's amazing. I was like, I watched the debates and was like amazed at all the fact checking going on. But anyway, Anna, thank you for closing out our show and reminding people, like it's our responsibility and our privilege to vote, and it's journalists' responsibility and privilege to get them the information they need to make good decisions.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Heck yeah, thank you. We want to bring everybody up and get a lot of thank yous. So Anna is going to be joined by Cara Romero, Evan, Turk, Mizell Stewart III, and Anel Arriola. We want to thank you all so much for telling us your personal story about what it means to you to be an American. Thank you. Thanks everyone for being on our show. To America, thank you so much for watching tonight. We appreciate your time, your attention, and your focus. We hope if you have already voted that you enjoyed it. If you are still planning to vote, that things go smoothly for you on Tuesday, or that you can drop your stuff off in a ballot box easily between now and then. We wish enfranchisement for all of our fellow citizens. Our next show will be closer to Thanksgiving. We have a little bit of a break, and so we will see you in mid-November on the 19th with food and family. We really appreciate your time and attention. Thank you so much for joining us.